Hello, and welcome to the Three Links Oddcast, your podcast for all things having to do with Odd Fellowship. And now, here are your hosts.
Welcome to the Three Links Oddcast. I'm your co-host, Ainsley Heilich, and I'm here with...
another co-host, Toby Hansen. And this week, once again, we are joined with our special guest co-host, Brother Christopher McHale. Say hello to the folks, Christopher.
Hello, I'm the co-host who's as miserable as a ghost. How are you guys doing tonight?
I'm doing
wonderful.
Well, it's great to have all of you listening here. We've got a guest with us for this episode. Now, since our number one download market for this podcast is Dallas, Texas, we all got together and said, hey, we need to get some kind of a guest from Dallas. Let's find the smartest, most creative, most handsome Oddfellow in the Metroplex. But he wasn't available, so instead, we've got Brother Ivan Kocher here from Dallas Lodge number 44. Welcome, brother.
Howdy.
Now, seeing as how you're an Oddfellow deep in the heart of Texas, I imagine, now I've not visited Texas, I've not been to a lodge in Texas, but I imagine that I've pretty much figured out what Odd Fellowship is like there in Texas. And I imagine you all wear your cowboy hats to the meetings. You've got revolvers on your hip. Each lodge hall includes a small shrine to the Alamo. Now, is that pretty much accurate for Odd Fellowship in Texas?
Mostly. I think you might be confusing Dallas 44 with Waxahachie 80, but generally I think that's right. Maybe shotguns instead of revolvers.
Oh, shotguns are effective, especially against small game like birds, but a little bit harder to carry around. But then again, that's why you have a gun rack in your truck.
And that's why we're Texans.
That's right. So tell us a little bit, start off with a little bit about yourself, Brother Ivan, where you're from, how you came to join the Odd Fellows, and what kind of experience you're having there with Dallas Lodge number 44.
I'm actually a non-native Texan. I've been here for 7 years. I grew up in New Mexico and lived on the East Coast for a while, and then lived in England for a while, and came from the absolute polar opposite of Dallas, Brighton, about an hour south of the UK, in 2013. When I came to Dallas, one of the very first people I met was actually a fellow Mason. And I talked to him about Masonic lodges in Texas and in Dallas, Masonry in Texas when I lived in Maryland, and the UK had a mixed reputation. So I was nervous about finding a fit at a Masonic lodge in Dallas. And he actually said, look, there's this Oddfellows lodge that's really on the verge of falling apart. And I wonder if you would help me to go in and revive it, because they've got a very long history, and the few people they've got left are really good people. And I think there's an opportunity there to really revive a lodge that's falling apart. And that's how I got into Dallas 44. When I came into the lodge in I guess it was September 2013 or early 2014, I think, that I was actually initiated as an Oddfellow. And when I came in and was introduced to the lodge, there were maybe 5 or 6 active members. And they immediately put me into the chairs, which I was kind of used to from Masonic lodges. But it quickly became clear to me that Odd Fellowship was a fundamentally different animal than Masonry. I've never really looked back. I became very active in Odd Fellowship in Texas, and really haven't looked back. I think I've been to a Masonic lodge twice in the last 8 years.
So what you're saying is we won. We beat the Masons.
Yes. Yes. In my case, that was certainly the case. It really is. It's a very different animal. And Texas's version of it is very different.
Now, Brother Ainsley and I, we just had the opportunity to do a guest spot on the First Three Knocks podcast, which is a Masonic podcast up in Canada. And we went on there and talked a bit about Odd Fellowship. And the topic that comes up frequently in those discussions is how the two are different and the ways in which those differences manifest yourself. And so you alluded to that. So before we go any further, I'd like to find out what your perspective is on that and how you see the two as different and any ways in which you think they might be complementary.
Well, I became a Mason in 2007. So I had a lot of experience with Masonry before I became an Odd Fellow. And I traveled a lot for work and personally, and I visited a lot of Masonic lodges. And I became a Mason when I went to the UK. And what the biggest difference that I see is, and I'm just speaking from my experience, Masonry is really focused on the individual. It's about men improving each other as men, and it's very focused on personal growth. The degrees are very individual centric, and the way the lodge behaves is very much as a group of individuals coming together. Odd Fellowship, at least in Texas, I haven't seen a lot of Odd Fellow lodges in other states yet, other than Oregon. It's much more oriented on a community. And it's much more oriented on being a group of people that have relationships with each other, and then extending those relationships out to the community at large. So the way that tends to manifest itself in my experience is that Odd Fellow lodges tend to be focused more on what are they going to do in the community. What are they going to do? What are they going to do for the group of people that are in the lodge? Whereas Masonry is more about how can I help people make an individual difference. A lot of Masonic lodges that I came into contact with, they would do things in the community, but that really wasn't their primary focus. They're really focused on helping individuals be better people.
Which lodge did you visit in Oregon, and how did you find yourself there?
I went up to Tillamook for the Muscovites degree. And when I went up there with another brother from here in Texas, we met a lot of folks from Peninsula 128 at that degree. And I very quickly realized, one, that I really needed to go visit that lodge, which I still haven't, and I need to. I would have this year, but plague time and all. But I realized that Oregon is really a fundamentally different, or at least Portland is, a very different lodge experience.
And I can speak to that personally because being in a neighboring jurisdiction, I get to visit down in Oregon frequently. And Peninsula 128 is very similar to Waxahachie number 80, which is, it's the lodge that most people outside of the state know about. In some ways,
they're not very similar at all in my mind, but in that sense, I can understand it.
And in the other sense, it's the atypical lodge for that jurisdiction, because most of Oregon, and that jurisdiction has done a fantastic job of helping hang on to lodges, especially in rural areas. Oregon is great about that, and they have a wonderful Grand Secretary, Ron Kuntz, who just does a great job. But Peninsula is kind of the oddball lodge of all of the lodges in Oregon. You know, they tend to have young, urban, kind of very sophisticated, very attached to their immediate community kind of members. Whereas most of the lodges in Oregon tend to be in smaller towns and rural areas. Their Grand Warden right now is actually from Farmers Lodge number 49, which is in the northeast corner of Oregon in an area where they mostly raise livestock feed and have some cattle. So
Wow.
most of Odd Fellowship in Oregon tends to be fairly rural and traditional. If you visited Peninsula 128, you realize what a special and wonderful lodge that is. So, that's great that you've been able to visit Tillamook. They have a great lodge too. But Peninsula is definitely an experience. I think any Odd Fellow who travels, there are certain lodges you know about that you want to visit. You want to visit Peninsula 128 in Portland.
I can believe it. I mean, I'm really curious about Odd Fellowship in other states, because when I was a Mason in Maryland, I remember one of the brothers in our Masonic lodge there actually tried to recruit members from our lodge to help him revive the Odd Fellow Lodge in Baltimore. At that time, so that would have been 2008, 2009. I think he said, look, this lodge, it was almost the same story that I heard when I came to Texas. Look, this lodge is dying. It has a great history. There's this thing called Odd Fellowship. It has a great history. Can you come and help me fix this? And at that time, my attitude was, I'm just starting in with this fraternal stuff. I'm getting I could put in a ton of effort into just my Masonic lodge. I don't need to take on another organization.
Your lodge, Dallas 44, when you joined, you said there's only 5 or 6 people that were regularly showing up for meetings. At least pre-COVID, the photos that would be posted on social media showed pretty large crowds showing up to the meetings and things like that. And yeah. I've actually met Jen Sereno from your lodge as well previously. And
she speaks very highly of you, by the way.
Oh, good.
Oh, yeah.
It's better to be speak highly of than lowly of. But your lodge definitely has taken on its own unique vibe that I think has kind of started a little bit of a trend, so to speak, because whenever I was getting things going with my lodge again, we looked to your lodge as kind of a template of being an artsy fartsy lodge. And I think other lodges are kind of following suit. Lorraine 4 in Louisville would be an example of another kind of art heavy lodge. So how do you start from a lodge that's only got a quorum to building it to enough people to create a lodge identity or almost a lodge brand, so to speak? How does that transition happen?
So I think the history of Dallas 44 in the last 10 years is really good for an education about that. Dallas has a very large arts community. I think it's a function of the fact that there's a lot of money in Dallas, and although the arts community in Dallas doesn't have a lot of money, they benefit from a lot of rich patrons that buy art and drive the creation of art in the community. There was a small group of people who were very active in sort of orchestrating public arts events in the late 90s and into the mid 2000s. And that group became very interested in sort of prankster behavior and prankster activities. And at one point, they all became Masons and tried to modernize a Masonic lodge in Dallas that had been in existence for 150, 160 years, one of the oldest Masonic lodges in Dallas. And they got enough press for it that it drew the attention of the older members of the Masonic Lodge, who ended up driving them out.
Oh, wow.
and literally driving them out. Some of those members have remained Masons. Most of them have not. That same group became interested in Odd Fellowship. And they became interested in Odd Fellowship because one of the members of the community, Bruce Webb, who you guys might know from As Above, So Below.
I would personally love to interview him on this show if you're listening, Bruce.
Bruce or his wife Julie would be great guests for you. I think you can really trace the revival for younger generations in Texas to Bruce Webb personally, because Bruce, I guess in 2001, Bruce and Julie bought a building in Waxahachie in downtown, which, by the way, is a fantastic art gallery. They're both art dealers and art collectors. And if you haven't been there, it's worth a trip to Waxahachie just to see their gallery. The building that they bought was right around the corner from the Oddfellow Lodge. And Bruce went to that Oddfellow Lodge out of curiosity. And he then recruited, he was interested in it, I'm guessing, for more of the esoteric angle, because he had also become a Mason there in Waxahachie. Bruce realized that the organization had fallen on hard times. At that point, the age of everyone in the lodge was over 70, which is not uncommon. And he recruited another guy named Andy Don Emmons, who would also be a great guest for you. So Andy Don is really, he's a really prolific and very public artist in Dallas and Houston, and really anywhere in that Dallas-Houston corridor, he's very well known. And his wife, Sandy, is equally colorful, but in a different way. They're both absolutely fantastic people. Andy joined Waxahachie Lodge originally, and he and Bruce acted as conduits. Their charisma was what drew a lot of people initially. And I think Waxahachie also benefited because they drew in Oliver Peck, who is very well known, literally publicly, because of his tattoo show. And a lot of brothers were attracted to Waxahachie because they wanted to know Oliver Peck, and they wanted to know Andy Don Emmons. Some of them knew Bruce, but I think most of them were drawn by Andy and Oliver. So that celebrity helped that lodge grow. When Andy moved to Dallas, Andy became part of that community of artist pranksters that I was talking about. They invited him to join the Masons with them, but his reaction was, "I've already got this Oddfellow thing going, and I'm really into that." And he remains a very strong and active Oddfellow. Once we got the lodge, once we got Dallas 44 stable from a generational transition perspective. Dallas 44 had gone through already one round at trying to revive, and the older members who were essentially controlling it at that time ran those people off because they were extremely conservative. By the time I came in as part of a second wave of people that were making, essentially, I didn't know it at the time, but we were making a second attempt at reviving it. And when we came in, the older guard was more, they weren't as, I don't want to say they weren't as strong, but they weren't as intransigent about change. They knew that they had to bring about change. So the group of guys that I came in with essentially stabilized the offices, I took over as secretary to hold the organization together from a business perspective. When I joined, I didn't have a beard, and I would show up to meetings in a collared shirt and blazer. And that generated a lot of credibility with the older members that I actually was a responsible human being. I didn't have visible tattoos. I didn't have any visible piercings. And I was able to convince them that we could be good stewards of the lodge. The second year, so I talk about, we had maybe 5 active members and maybe 40 members. Within that first year, by 2015, we grew to 87 members.
Oh, wow.
That's impressive.
And that was on the basis of the fact that the first Noble Grand we brought in was Andy Don Emmons, who, by the way, did not become a full member. He came in as an associate because he very strongly holds on to his Waxahachie 80 membership. The second year, so that would have been 2014. 2015, we had his wife, Sandy, as the Noble Grand. She's a saleswoman by profession, and she actively turned on the salesmanship and actively recruited. And I would say that the majority of the members that came in during that year came in directly from her contact.
She definitely sounds like somebody we should get on the show then to see if she could give out some advice on recruitment, because I know that's something that a lot of us struggle with, because how do you sell Odd Fellowship and present it in a way that is simple enough to make people get intrigued? And I would love to hear some of her tactics, as you know, using sales experience to do that, because that's something we definitely all need to learn a little bit better.
Well, and the two things I would say that really drove it were we had social gatherings after every single meeting. Every single meeting, we would meet in the lodge, have our business meeting, and then go meet at a bar locally.
How often do you guys meet?
We meet twice a month, first and third Tuesdays, 7:30 p.m. Come and join our meeting. But literally every meeting, we were going out as a group. And that made a huge difference. And the way that she sold it was, here is your opportunity to be in a charity-focused organization and network and hang out with cool people. That drew people in. And not all of the members that she drew in stayed active. I think it's once you get that engine going, it's easy to bring people in. It's hard to keep them.
Yeah.
Because historically, people were held by the promise of additional degrees. Now we get degrees out of the way probably within the first 6 months. If people don't do a degree rally, they're going to have all of their degrees within 6 months. So the lure of quasi-esoteric knowledge is not really high after that point, because that I think that what that time period does is give people a taste of fellowship.
Mm-hmm.
I think Texas is fascinating because the fellowship that fraternal organizations give feeds directly into the culture of Texas. And I really firmly believe that that's how Dallas 44 got going. And frankly, but in the state, it's us and Waxahachie are the two major engines of Odd Fellowship in Texas. Everybody else is half or lower the size. Waxahachie has about 100 and I think they've got about 140 members on the books now. And
wow.
any given meeting you go to, even during COVID, they have 30 to 40 people in the room.
Wow.
Dallas 44, we're now up to about 10 people in the room reliably during COVID. Our lodge is a lot more, it's very different than Waxahachie. We have a lot more members who are much more concerned about the risk of COVID. So we have fewer people show up, but we also maintain Zoom meetings fairly regularly. I came in as Noble Grand this year. It's my goal to have at least one a month. We'll do our business meetings, get our business out of the way, but really we want to drive the fellowship that keeps the organization strong. And that's what we'll engage in the Zoom meetings for.
So can you discuss some of the activities and events that you put on as a lodge to help reinforce and get the name out there?
We actually don't do very many external events. So we do one major event a year. That's a public event that is, there's a local Mardi Gras parade that we put a float in and parade around in. And that's very visible. We get all dressed up in outfits and ride in a trailer through the neighborhoods of Oak Cliff. This year and in the last couple years, Jen Serino has driven a revival of the Living Legacy program, which is a tree planting program. And we have a goal of planting at least 44 trees a year through
Nice.
that. This year, we're planning on doing that twice within the next couple months. Well, we've got the season for planting trees, and I'll probably try and drive another one towards the end of the year. We are planning on doing a little bit more volunteer outreach this year through Foundation 45, which is an organization that's focused on mental health issues in the Dallas community. In the past, we've done work with Jonathan's Place, which is a home for children to meet our purpose around orphans. We've experimented with different programs. We tried to do a prison books program for a while until we found out just how difficult it is to get books into prisons, which is a crime in and of itself, but that's a topic for another day. So I'd say that we don't really do a lot of straight up community outreach to strangers, but we do maintain a lot of presence in the arts community in Dallas. And most of our members are pretty public about their Odd Fellowship member status.
If I can just hit on a point that you brought up before, you said that there was an issue where you had older members driving out younger members.
Yeah.
How exactly were they doing that in your experience? Because it's something that we hear about all the time. So yeah, I'm just curious how it happened.
I wasn't there when it happened. I've only heard about it secondhand. What I can tell you from my own personal experience with the people who were still there when I came in, they were very, very conservative. They had a lot of, they expressed a lot of viewpoints that I would associate with the 50s and early 60s pre-civil rights. They were not one of the things that was frustrating to the members who came in. A lot of the members who came in during that first wave of revival really wanted to do charity work, and they wanted to use the resources of the lodge to drive charity work and to actively market the lodge. Unfortunately, at the time that they came in, the secretary at that time, who had been the secretary of the lodge literally for 40 years, he absolutely shut down any kind of spending of money. Anything was just not going to happen. And I think that was equally frustrating because they felt like they were coming in and they weren't allowed to do anything. And when you're not allowed to do something, and at the same time, you're confronted with what may be a noxious political environment, even though we're theoretically an apolitical organization, those topics are going to come up in conversation as you're sitting around socializing. The combination of those two things were what drove them out. I think if it had been one or the other, those people might have stayed, but the combination of both made it too difficult. And that was one of the things that we focused on when we came in. One of the things that we did financially was Dallas 44 had enough investment income based on our endowment in order to be able to fund some minor social activities, or at least to act as a seed fund, right? The minute you start offering dinner to people coming into your lodge, you're going to draw their attention. You can feed a large group of people at $2 or $3 a head if you're creative. And it seems like a relatively small thing, but if you're trying to build an environment where people are comfortable interacting with strangers, meals are a perfect way to do it. You don't have to buy beer, you don't have to buy liquor, but if you're driving a social event at a place that serves it, that's going to make it more attractive to people to show up, and they can wander up, talk with you. If they don't like you, they wander off, and there's no cost. They don't have an investment. They don't feel like they have to stay there because they're locked into your lodge building. Those kinds of strategies for mixing publicly, where you're also making it safe for the person to leave if they want to, it helps. It lowers the tension level of making friends with a stranger.
You know, what you described there sounds like the absolute classic lodge cultural divide. And each of us have seen this in various ways. I know, Christopher, you've experienced it with your lodge in Missoula. Ainsley, you started a brand new lodge, but you learned Odd Fellowship in another lodge. And I have certainly seen it from both sides, having been the new Odd Fellow who comes in wide-eyed and says, wow, this is great, let's do all this stuff. And then also having been the seasoned lodge officer who says, now we got to plan for the future. We got to make sure that we still have something. Because on the one hand, you have people who come in, they're enthusiastic. They want to get started. They say, wow, Odd Fellowship is great. I want to feel like I'm a big part of this. I want to take this wonderful new thing I have discovered, put it into the community, let everybody know that they all should become Odd Fellows. But then at the same time, I have also been the officer of a lodge where we have been hanging on by a thread, and we are desperately trying to make sure that we can just have enough meetings in a year so that our charter is not put in jeopardy, because 4 of us will be driving to the hall and hoping that one of us will call someone else to make sure that there will be a 5th member showing up so that we can do business. Because of that, it breeds a very definitely conservationist attitude about the resources of a lodge. If you've been through a couple years or even a couple decades in some cases of mere survival as a lodge, and you know how fragile that is, you want to stockpile every resource that you have and clutch them jealously. And also, when you get new people coming in, there is not a kind of established path in Odd Fellowship for new members to come in and prove themselves especially when you join a lodge that has been stagnant, the same 6 elderly men for 30 years, and they just rotate the offices amongst themselves. You know, so there isn't the new member who got to be left scene supporter one year and moved up and became conductor the following year, and then after that was warden, and then finally got elected vice grand. If you're coming into a stagnant lodge and all of a sudden within 6 months you've got 10 new members and they're all saying, hey, let us run the lodge, that is a very scary thing if you're the person who has been holding that lodge together for 30 years to ensure survival. So I'm not saying that either one of those viewpoints is right or wrong, but that is definitely a situation that happens all the time in Odd Fellowship. We all see it over and over and over again, because who knows, you know, you've been a member for 6 months and they say, okay, we're going to elect you secretary. And then you're there for 3 months and then you get bored and you quit going to lodge. Well, that just ensures that for the next 10 years, anybody who joins the lodge is going to be given zero responsibility in any capacity, so the lodge doesn't get burned by this new person who came in and decided that it was too much work or they didn't want to do it or what have you.
One of the most interesting things to me about my Odd Fellowship experience in Texas is that if you look across Texas, there are only 38 lodges in the state, 5 of which are Rebecca lodges. So I don't want to discount them entirely, but I think Rebecca's in Texas is a very different animal than Odd Fellowship. So of the 33 Oddfellow lodges, right, the few new ones that have come up are very, very young. We made a purposeful attempt out of Dallas 44 to seed a couple of lodges. One of the lodges that we actively recruited, which is in an adjoining town, we brought in members to 44. We got them excited. They were doing about an hour and a half drive, and we said, we will help you integrate with a lodge in the city that you actually live in the hopes that we could share some of the goodness, right? We got them through the degrees in 44 and then sent them to the other lodge. That lodge, they lasted in about 6 months, and they had the same kind of group of a core couple of charismatic people who could draw members from the local community. And the experience that had happened at 44 5 to 10 years before I joined, it happened there exactly. The noble grand of that lodge literally sent the members their dismissal cards and said, you are dismissed from this lodge. It turned all of those people off of Odd Fellowship entirely. After having spent a year being very excited about Odd Fellowship, excited about the possibilities that it was going to offer. Now, I contrast that with within the last few years, there's been a new lodge in Dallas, Plano 114, that the member who really drove formation of that had met all of us in 44 and had been to Waxahachie. And as a result of those experiences, he started a lodge in Plano, which is very different. It's very different culturally than 44 or Waxahachie, but they're thriving. They're small, but they're thriving. And I think the promise and the goal that we have and Waxahachie has is really, we consider ourselves to be stewards of Odd Fellowship in Texas. We consciously intend to show that we will be responsible inheritors of the work that the older generation of Odd Fellows, who are now literally in their late 80s and early 90s, that we make them comfortable enough that we're not, even though we may be tattooed, we may be pierced, we may wear funny hats, we will be responsible stewards.
They may have rough, unseemly exteriors, one might even say.
I think I've heard that somewhere.
Sounds very familiar. Yeah.
I don't know. I'd have to go look it up somewhere.
Yeah, I think it's in some book that's got a red cover somewhere.
Yeah.
I think. Yeah. So to circle back to something you'd said before about the artists in your lodge being very kind of loud and proud about being members of Odd Fellows and of Dallas 44, what kind of things are the members doing to kind of like evangelize your lodge to the community, especially the artists? Because I'm an artist and I want to hear what your artists are doing because I'm an artist.
You're just a giggly schoolgirl today, aren't you, Ainsley?
I am.
So a good example is there is a yearly event called Speed Bump in our local community where local artists essentially open up their studios and they spontaneously set up a studio tour in the community. We make the lodge one of the stops on that Speed Bump tour.
Wonderful.
And actively solicit artists in our lodge to produce material and sell it and make it look like a studio. Make the lodge itself look like a studio where artists are producing things. A lot of our members are very public about wearing Oddfellows merchandise, or they will incorporate Oddfellows imagery into their art. Andy Don has done whole shows that are essentially creating an Oddfellow piece and replicating it. He has a great small wood piece of a tuxedoed skeleton riding a goat that I had to buy one because it was hilarious. But
That's
he
awesome.
produces, he made like 40 of them and was selling them at various local events. Waxahachie 80 every year does an Odd Fest, where essentially it's an artist festival, and they have a band and a beer stand and have people playing live music on a stage in the center of Waxahachie, sell beer and sell art. And a lot of the artists from 44 go down there. A lot of the artists in the broader community of Dallas and Waxahachie go there to move their art. There's a lot of art events in Dallas, or there were pre-plague. And some of the people running those events are Oddfellows or became Oddfellows. So I think it's almost like a characteristic that if people see over and over, oh, I've gone to this show, look, oh, that artist has a 3 links on. What is that? What's that about? We've had members, there's a bar in Deep Ellum, which is an entertainment district in Dallas, that's called 3 Links. And it is explicitly an Oddfellow punk bar. They have a giant painting done by Clay Stinnett, who became an Oddfellow at 44, above their bar. It's run by Scott Beggs, who's an Oddfellow member down at Waxahachie 80. And there's the Amos We Never Sleep album that's prominently in the bar. Now, he doesn't explicitly market it as an Oddfellow bar, but I guarantee you anybody who goes in there and sees that imagery and then sees it elsewhere is going to go, man, I wonder what that's about.
Yeah, that combined with the Heart and Hand Gallery and
the Heart and Hand Tattoo Studio.
Yep.
I mean, Oliver Peck does a charity event personally that he runs every year where he distributes toys to children. He staffs it with Oddfellows. A lot of the guys working that event, even though, again, it's not explicitly an Oddfellow event, there are a lot of Oddfellows in attendance. And the people that we can't get into those kind of events, we can also try to funnel into Amos as a separate appendant body. That also is a good way to publicly show a link to Odd Fellowship.
The mini bikes.
Yes.
Now, I understand
of course.
that tomorrow from when we're actually recording this, you are going down to Houston to help institute a new Amos Sanctorum.
Ooh.
Yep. That's
so
correct.
Once again, Dallas is helping to raise up Houston.
No comment. Although it's interesting, Houston is a good example of how different the lodges are around the state. So you mentioned the case of Oregon being primarily small rural lodges. That's really what most of Texas is like. The Houston Lodge, there are 2 lodges in Houston, at least. One of them is pretty active and pretty strong, but they don't really network with the rest of the state at all. And they act as an entity unto themselves.
Well, to be fair, it's a big state. It
is.
You can't easily just drive from Houston to El Paso. That's like a 2-day trip or something.
I always think of it as lodges are going to come together through one of 2 mechanisms, or through associates or through meetings, whether it's Grand Lodge or whether it's something like encampment that's explicitly chartered to bring people together. Capital 23 in Austin, which was started by Israel Freeland, who's now serving overseas in the Army. He was one of the people that helped us get Amos going in Texas, and they have an Amos Sanctorum down there. We have one in Dallas. Well, depending on who you talk to, it's in Waxahachie or Dallas. The membership is about 2/3 Waxahachie. But that went from 0 to 40 members within a year. Texas culturally has an affinity for fraternal organizations, and that's something that we've been able to capitalize on here.
They also have an affinity for tall hats.
They do indeed. And one of the draws for creating a sanctorum, an Amos Sanctorum in Houston, is that Texas doesn't want to be dependent on having to go to Supreme for the degree of perfection. So they're very focused on creating another sanctorum and creating a division to match the Mid-Atlantic division in the East and the division in the West, to have a Texas-focused one. I'm actively trying to work towards making sure that that's not just Texas, that it also encompasses Oklahoma and Louisiana, because Louisiana has seen a lot of growth recently.
Yes, they have.
Thanks to Brother LaBeef.
Yes.
So I think we have a real opportunity if we drive that local community. That's how I think we're going to revive and keep it going here in Texas, and then help our brethren and sistren in Louisiana, which we did. We went and helped them start a new lodge, and we've helped them do degree work in Shreveport. So we need to keep that up. And I think other lodges in other states need to do something similar.
Well, I think that's fantastic. And after all, really, aren't Oklahoma and Louisiana just larger parts of the state of Texas, really?
Oh, man, you're killing me.
Ah.
Louisiana was under at least 2 of the same flags.
I know.
Aren't they three flags over Louisiana?
Well, Louisiana has its own very interesting history, but at this point, I think this is an excellent opportunity for us to take a break and listen to this wonderful, heartfelt message from our sponsors, Pig and a Pug Bath Stuff. Remember, if you bathe, Pig and a Pug has stuff for you. We'll be back right after this.
All right, be honest. How much do you spend on coffee every month? $20? $50? $1,500? Well, that's probably not realistic. Anyway, I digress. Where was I? Oh yeah, Pig and a Pug. For the price of one of your not as good as last time lattes, one of your, what is this, 90% milk macchiatos, or about 350 cups of Folgers, you can get yourself some handmade soap. Yeah, handmade, and with the best ingredients and the most attention to detail that you could conceivably ask for. This stuff smells so good, it will align your chakras, send out multiple namastes, and best yet, make you smell like you don't spend the majority of your time these days walking around in your pajamas. Being that we're all home a lot more these days, we might even just take more showers just because we're bored. And it's fine for that too. Smell good whenever you want. Each order is packed with the greatest of care and includes freebies and loads of positivity. Listen, don't start an argument by telling the people that you love or people that you live with that they stink. Just get them a bar of soap, and Robert is your father's brother. So, take a minute, pop over to Etsy or Facebook and look up Pig and a Pug. Just bang in the coupon code THANKYOU24, and you're going to get 24% off your order. Literally, that's all you have to do. Pig and a Pug, Pig and a Pug, Pig and a Pug.
And we're back from our break, and we are here today with Ivan from Dallas 44 in Dallas, Texas, and we're discussing Odd Fellowship in his lodge and in Texas. Toby, why don't you give us our lodge shout out for today?
Well, thank you, brother. I would be happy to. We're going to combine two things in one here. We're going to tease our upcoming episode and do our lodge shout out. See, now this is what makes us sound like professionals, because we do stuff like this. Our lodge shout out goes to one of the other brand new lodges that's been chartered recently. That would be Chester Lodge number 281 in the grand jurisdiction of Virginia. Woohoo!
Yay!
And speaking of that brand new lodge, our next episode, which will be coming up here in a couple weeks, we're going to be talking to Brother Nick Curry and Sister Janet Gibson from Chester Lodge 281 in Virginia. They're going to take us through their process for how they discovered Odd Fellowship and what they did to get a new lodge up and running. And I can tell you from talking to Brother Nick a little bit, he has really been investing a lot of time into Odd Fellowship recently. He just coded a new website for the Grand Lodge of Virginia. Jurisdiction, please, please, please make websites so people can find where your lodges are to join them. Do not be one of those square-ish states in the Rocky Mountains where it is nearly impossible to make contact with lodges to join them. I am not going to name any of them, but some of them begin with vowels. So I didn't name anybody, but just so you know, make a website, please, people, please, for the love of all that is holy. In the name of Thomas Wildey himself, make a website so people can find your lodges. Okay, I'm done with my rant. I know that's usually your rant, Ainsley, but I did it.
It's okay. I will gladly share my eternal communications rant with you.
So getting back to our special guest here, Brother Ivan, you were telling us during the break, while we listened to that wonderful commercial from Pig and a Pug, about the way in which you grew your lodge. It was primarily about a couple of really charismatic individuals, and they were part of a community outside of the lodge. And that combination of charismatic individuals and being part of another community, that really set your lodge up for some, what seems to be some sustainable growth. So what can you tell us about that process? Now, obviously, you didn't go out and recruit these charismatic members because Andy Don Emmons, he was already a member in Waxahachie, and so took an associate membership there in Dallas. But he and his wife, Sandy, they were able to spread the word about Odd Fellowship, go out into their arts community, sort of their professional world around them, and bring people into Odd Fellowship. Since they have stepped back a little bit from being promoters, how have you managed to sustain the growth and or the interest in the lodge?
I think the best way that we maintain is through giving our members a good fellowship experience. And we take our social activities pretty seriously. We make sure that we not only serve dinner at every meeting now, that was a main, I can't underemphasize the importance of feeding people. But
if it's my wife's cooking, you might want to take that back.
Yes, but would you go to lodge to have a meal to avoid it?
Oh, of course I would.
Well, there you go. The lodge offers a meal and brings you in.
I feel like I would go to prison to avoid my wife's cooking.
Oh, come on, lodge night.
Christopher, have you been eating the soaps again, thinking that that's dinner or snacks?
No.
The soap snacks.
Not at all. Not at all.
By really encouraging members to show their Odd Fellowship, not just verbally, but through wearing emblems or bringing it up in conversation. I think that's what continues to draw people in. Again, we saw a huge surge of membership initially when we first had Andy and Sandy come in. We went from about 5 to 10 active members up to 80 members in the lodge within a year. We're now stabilized at somewhere around 120 or so. I think that's about where we'll end up. The new members that will come in, they come in, we continue to offer them a good experience. We get them out into the community. We make them feel that they're part of a community. And that's that. Once you can form a core stable group, people are drawn to it.
Now, do your members ever give the sign of recognition in pictures? Because that's something I've been doing. If I ever get the opportunity, I like to give the sign just to see if anybody's watching out there.
Not that I've seen. I'll put it that way.
You'll have to start encouraging that. Let people know if they're taking pictures on social media or things like that. Give the sign of recognition and just see if we can make that go viral, as the kids say.
Oh man, I don't want to.
There's a certain jurisdiction that I don't want to name because I don't want to give away what this recognition sign is. But there's a certain jurisdiction that they are very good at consistently showing that in every photo. So I do commend that jurisdiction for that dedication to the recognition symbol.
Yeah, that's one of the...
They know who they are.
That's one of the coolest and most fun things about being in a fraternal order is you have your own special culture just unto yourselves. And so I like to see those little times when that special culture kind of pokes up through the larger, fattier cultural milieu.
So something that I really love is supermodels. And it seems that Odd Fellowship in Texas has a supermodel to go by. Do you think that that is something that other jurisdictions can kind of shoehorn themselves into to kind of adapt the Texas way of doing things?
I don't know. I've thought a lot about this, and I really think that Texas has a culture that really is around people joining a group in order to do things or in order to help themselves. There's one of the members of the lodge that I was talking to about this said that he immediately recognized Odd Fellowship from his childhood in South Texas. And the rural community that he was in had a farm co-op that all of the farmers in the community felt like they had to be members of the co-op because not only could they contribute to the community, but if they weren't a member of that they were somehow going to miss out on everybody helping them when it came time. And that kind of mutual support model, that is peculiar to Texas. Texas really looks for people to affiliate with in a way that I'm not sure any other state that I've lived in or visited does. I'm not saying that they don't. There's a cultural affinity to that kind of fellowship. One of the things that I think Odd Fellowship really does have to bring, though, and that other states may be able to emulate, is teaching people what fellowship is that may never have come into contact with it. In Texas, it's familiar as a hindbrain thing. They don't explicitly recognize fellowship, but it's familiar to them culturally. I think the closest thing that other states have to something like that is a church. And since so few people are used to participating in a church, unless they're already in one, they don't have a lot of experience with the fellowship in a church. And one of the most positive things that I've seen about 44 is I have seen the positive effects of that fellowship. I have seen people come into our lodge that are really kind of alienated and broken, and they heal through lodge fellowship. And when you see that, it sounds totally cheesy, I know, but when you see that happen, it's inspiring, and it makes you want to extend that fellowship to others. And I think that that kind of benefit is something that other lodges can emulate and can demonstrate. When people see a group of us all going out as Oddfellows and having a good time together, you know what? People come up and ask us you guys all look like you're wearing 3 rings. What is that?
Oh, it's this new shirt I got from a tattoo shop.
Yeah. Or what's that? All these guys I see have the same tattoo. What the hell is that all about?
We're part of a biker gang.
We're on the chain gang together.
A mini biker gang.
A mini biker.
A mini biker gang. 50 cc's, nothing larger. Well, I think that is an absolutely beautiful description of the power of Odd Fellowship, because one of the things that I always tell people about Odd Fellowship is that for all the places in the world that any one person may be a meaningless number or a statistic or another cog in the wheel, when you belong to an Oddfellows Lodge that is meaningful, you have meaning as a person, and you become an important part of other people's lives. And that is something I think that is really not exclusive, but very unique to Odd Fellowship, in that we have that very strongly, that sense of purpose, that sense of being there as a means of mutual aid and support for each other. And if you're someone who is lonely, feels disconnected, you're having a tough time in life, you want to feel like you're part of a supportive community, join your lodge. Go to the Odd Fellows. Now, I say that, somebody out there is going to apply to one of those lodges somewhere in the middle of nowhere that 6 elderly gentlemen who meet on Tuesday afternoon and complain about how expensive the phone bill is. You may not have that wonderful, warm, caring experience right away when you join a lodge like that. But that experience can be engendered. That kind of lodge can be built. And that is, if nothing else, I think that's the greatest lesson of what you're telling us here, is that in Dallas, you have found the people to make a wonderful lodge that really, really cares about its members.
And we talked a little bit earlier about the cultural distinction between the generations in a lodge.
Yeah.
One of the ways that we overcame that gap over time was to extend that feeling of fellowship to the older members of our lodge. That's something that I can't overstate. By reaching out and making those older members of the lodge feel like they were part of the organization and feel like they were part of the community, that made them more comfortable with the community. It creates a virtual feedback loop. That in turn makes the whole lodge stronger, and it reminds those older people of why they became Odd Fellows to begin with. And I've seen older members of lodges bloom and blossom because of the attention of the younger members. We oftentimes just focus on the conflict, but we can focus on the fellowship just as much. And I think that's where we're going to see those kind of those generational distinctions get overcome.
Now, I've got a 2-part question for you here. You mentioned that your membership is at about 120 members currently, correct?
Yep.
So 2 things. Number 1, do you have an encampment in Dallas? And number 2, with that many members in the lodge, has there been any thought about splitting off some of those members to form another lodge? And the reason I ask this question is because our podcasting colleagues, Modern Goat Rider, Josh and Billy in Victoria, British Columbia, they have a kind of a similar situation up there where they have 3 lodges that have all attained fairly large membership, over 100 members, and they are looking at an issue where there are only so many jobs to do in a lodge, and you can only keep so many members engaged at a time. So they're looking at the possibility of maybe, oh, I don't know if the pandemic ever ends and they reopen the borders, chartering an encampment in Victoria so that they can get more people involved in Odd Fellowship who already belong to the lodge. Or the possibility of maybe chartering another lodge in Victoria. So I'm curious if you've looked at that in Dallas and if you've said, hey, let's go to this neighborhood on the other side of town and recharter an old lodge that used to be there. Or, is there something is there an encampment that more active members can belong to? What are you doing for sort of that next wave of members?
So I'll say a few things about that. Although we have 120 members, pre-plague, we were getting probably between 20 and 35 members a meeting. Okay. Those active members rotated over time. We would have a steady number of people there, but the actual people who were sitting in those seats were different. So we don't see the kind of population pressure to split off, right? That being said, we did start an encampment. I founded that encampment with some other folks. We did that for two reasons. One was we really wanted to preserve the encampment degrees. And we heard persistent rumors that might not happen if more encampments didn't show up. Two, the encampment officers were very old. I'm now Grand Scribe of Texas. The previous Grand Scribe just turned 90 this last Friday. So I looked at that and said, if I don't step in, or if somebody doesn't step in, it's just going to dry up and blow away. That being said, we are down to 5 encampments across the state. I'm not convinced that encampment as an institution can survive unless we actively start to try to grow it through the lodges that are strong, i.e. Waxahachie and Houston, if we can get them involved. So I'll say that. And there are 2 encampments that have demised within the last few years. So I think our timeline for doing it is fairly short. We're down to 5, I think, in the state. So that's on encampments. Splitting versus what else are we doing? The issue of I'm never going to become an officer is real. That is a real issue. And people who have been members in 44 for 3 or 4 years, they have no real experience with fraternal organizations, right? I have 13, 14 years of experience now. I'm an old hand. But the fact that I'm an old hand after having only been a member of any fraternity for 13 years should tell you that most of the people coming in, they just don't have experience with it. So they don't think about going out and starting a new lodge. If they did start a new lodge, who's going to keep them honest about behaving as a lodge, right? You've got to have people who know how to do it to do it. Now, what I have seen is that the more experienced members of our lodge are now going out and joining the lines in other lodges in cities that are relatively close by. So Meredith Moore, who is one of the more prominent and more active members of our lodge, she wasn't able to go through the chairs as quickly as I think she might have. So she went into the chairs in Fort Worth, which is 45 minutes an hour away. She's now serving Noble Grand this year. I'm Noble Grand at 44. Essentially, 44 has now taken over the officer line in Fort Worth, right? There's another officer of our lodge who has gone to a different lodge and is now going through the line there. So there's options. If people look in their state and see what are lodges that are dying, that's a more attractive option for seeding a lodge and reviving a lodge, because if you do it that way, you have people who are experienced with the basic mechanics of running a lodge. They know ritual. They know why ritual is important. They have an idea of how to do the administrative tasks of a lodge. You know, it's easy to start a lodge. How do you keep it going?
Yes.
Who's going to be secretary? Who wants to do all that obnoxious trivia? Right? You got to find somebody nuts to do that. And be ready to do it for the next 20 years. So if you're going into an established lodge, you at least have a chance of learning that material from somebody who's done it. I would never have been an effective secretary if I hadn't had a year of an old secretary literally hovering over my back, telling me, look, this is the explicit things that you have to do. And by the way, here are all of the things that are not in the books that you have to do. Here are all of the things that aren't necessarily written down that are expected of you as a secretary, that are critical. I maintain secretary, treasurer are the two most important offices in any lodge. Noble grands come and go.
Yes. Mm-hmm. The secretary, though, since you're the Grand Scribe of Texas, you understand one very important thing. If you control the information for an organization, you have the power. That is true of the lodge secretary. It's true of the grand secretary of a jurisdiction or the grand scribe of a jurisdiction. It's a really super important part, smack dab in the middle. If you control the information, you have the power.
Well, and you have the ability, you have the most influence on keeping the organization on track. There's a difference between having power for power's sake and having power to make sure that the organization can go over the bumps. I think one of the things that secretaries do is act as a shock absorber, right? As a secretary, you need to be careful about getting involved in any kind of internal politics that emerge in any group of people. Politics are going to emerge in any group of people. You get three people together, two of them are going to talk smack about the third one. A secretary has to guide over those kinds of conflicts. A secretary has to offer gentle counsel to a noble grand to say, look, I know you've got all these things you want to do. This is how much money we actually have. This is how much we can actually spend. Everybody wants to pipe up and lodge and volunteer to give money to something. It's the job of the secretary and the treasurer to say, you know what, try to keep that under control.
And I'll actually add something to that specifically. If you dig into our ritual in the fine print, you will find the finance committee. And the finance committee in a lodge has a really, really important job. I did some work helping one of the lodges here in our jurisdiction to understand how things function because they were kind of isolated and they got off track. They were not in regular communication with other lodges, and they didn't know a lot about how things were done. So I had to teach them the roles, what a secretary traditionally does, what a treasurer does, a financial secretary, and then the finance committee. And one of the most important things about the finance committee is the entire lodge doesn't have the opportunity to look at the bills before they get voted on. So they have a group of 3 people, usually, the finance committee, who reviews the bills on behalf of the lodge. And they say, yes, these are all legitimate bills. That's why there's a line in the order of business, report of the Committee on Finance. So they review the bills and let the rest of the lodge know they've seen the bills, they're legitimate. The other part of that is every lodge is supposed to have trustees. The trustees are there to look out the long-term assets of the lodge. That's why the trustees are in charge of the building. That's why trustees are in charge of any rents collected, any investments made by the lodge. So every year when we hold our election of officers and everybody skips over or forgets to elect a trustee, I always say, oh, no, that's one of your most important officers. You need good trustees who will look out for the long-term interests of the lodge and report to the lodge regularly. what you're talking about with making sure the lodge doesn't overspend its finances, it is a really good idea to look at your annual report at the end of the year after you have filed it with the Grand Secretary in a timely manner. Do not drag that out for several months. I had to go talk to a lodge that did that in my jurisdiction one time. You look at the annual report, and that gives you a really good idea of what your budget should look like for the next year. So even if you don't go to the step of developing a budget going forward as a lodge, you look at your annual report, and that tells you where you spent your money and what you did. And that is a really good template for what you should be able to do for the coming year. If you have a lot of cash flow, it will show on the annual report that you're getting a lot of money coming in. If you don't have a lot of cash flow and you need to build up more of a nest egg, that'll show on the annual report too. So that's a very important aspect, especially if there are any young new Oddfellows listening to this podcast, which I hope there are. That's something you should be aware of. There are mechanisms in place in the lodge structure for both short-term and long-term financial health of the lodge.
One thing that I would say about that is it's easy for a healthy lodge with a history and a structure to put those kinds of offices in place. For a lot of the lodges that are listening, they're not going to be in lodges that are stable. They're not going to be in lodges that have the luxury of having a separate secretary, financial secretary, treasurer, 3 trustees, 3 finance committee members. That's 9 people.
Yeah.
Before you even get to who's going to sit in the chairs in the line. I think we have to be creative as lodge leaders in filling those roles if we don't have the members to fill them. So this year at 44, as Noble Grand, I have appointed and am driving a financial committee for where there really hasn't been a strong one in the last 5 years. So teaching that committee about here is how the finances of a lodge work. Here's how the finances of our lodge work. Because Dallas 44 is complex because it's a lodge that's been around for 160 years, right? We operate a cemetery. Almost nobody in the lodge has even been in a cemetery, much unless it's to go look at gravestones. They certainly don't understand how a cemetery business works. They don't understand how the legacy model of cemetery operation and management has changed over time. I would never have known that if it hadn't been for the secretary that I took over from, who essentially taught me about the funeral industry, right? So that we could run the cemetery. We were lucky enough to have an endowment. Most people under the age of 60 have no idea how to manage investment accounts. They don't even know how to interact with a broker, because the reality of the situation economically in the US today is that most people don't have an extensive savings account, much less an investment portfolio. So they have to learn about how investments generate income and generate cash that the lodge can use. Because let's face it, if we're charging money and getting hit by sovereign grand per capita, Grand Lodge per capita, how much money are you really going to have left over from your membership dues? $15 a member? $20 a member?
Mm-hmm.
If you've got 20, 30 members in a lodge, that's $600 in a year. Where's your money coming from to pay utilities? Where's your money coming from to pay for the meals that you're going to have? Are you going to do potlucks for everything? Where's the money going to come from for office supplies for your secretary? Is she going to have to pay for it out of her own pocket? Those are the kinds of things that I think, as we educate lodges about how to operate, those are the kinds of help that we can offer. If you're gonna start a lodge, try to find another fraternal organization that you can share space with. Don't think that you have to do it on your own. there's a community of other fraternal organizations, even outside of the ones that are directly within the Odd Fellows, that can help you and that will be happy to help you. There are resources that are available to you. But if I had come in even 3 years ago and said, oh, we need to have the following 9 people, and then, oh, by the way, we need to have a noble grand, chaplain, a vice grand, a warden, it just turns into more members than you have. Everybody has an office. There's a transition that you make when all of a sudden you realize that you have more members than you have offices. Managing through that growth curve, again, we managed it from 10 active members, maybe 30 or 40 on the books, up to 87 on the books, up to 120 on the books. Managing through that transition is something that I think we need to be cognizant of as we help smaller lodges grow.
Well, that is really great and really useful information. Thank you so much. Is there anything else you would like to share with us on this episode?
No, I'm glad to be on it. I'm really glad to be able to hook up with you guys and find out what you're doing. I know I've babbled a lot on this podcast, but I genuinely am interested in what other states are doing.
Well, we are certainly happy to tell those stories and to share those stories. And I will take this opportunity to share with our listeners, if you are in a lodge and you think something really great is going on there, let us know. We want to share that story too, just like we're doing here with Brother Ivan. We are here to tell the stories of Odd Fellowship from all corners of the earth. Actually, I'm not sure that the earth has corners because it is round, but from all of those round parts that are kind of corner-like, we want to share those stories. So please, please, please get in touch with us. You can go to our website, www.3linksoddcast.com. Look us up there. You can email us the number 3, not the word, but the number, 3linksoddcast@gmail.com. You can look up the 3 Links Oddcast on Facebook, and you can send us Facebook messages. We are also on Instagram, which is the kids' favorite nowadays. They love taking snaps for the Insta, as the kids say. We are on Instagram as 3 Links Oddcast. You can look us up there. Get in touch with us. We want to share your stories because we are, as a result of being here on this podcast, we're finding out so many wonderful stories about Odd Fellowship and the way that new lodges are coming about. People are discovering Odd Fellowship. You know, the order is growing in places. We want to share those stories, so definitely get in touch with us. That brings us also to our closing segment, the Odd Podge. Now, who would like to go first for this episode's Odd Podge?
I'll go first. I am going to be completely unoriginal with my Odd Podge and kind of recycle one that I'm going to probably recycle a few times. And building off of the conversation of today of mentorship is the upcoming book that I have illustrated, that the words were written by soon-to-be Grand Master of California, Michael Greenziger. And the book is called The Odd Fellows Primer. And you could learn more about that at oddfellowsprimer.org. And that will be coming out shortly. We're hoping to have it published in the summer, and it will be available through Amazon. So anybody looking to learn more about the Odd Fellows, how to run a lodge meeting, anything and everything that we could put into it to make it a comprehensive manual for a member of any level to get something out of. And it'll be illustriously illustrated with I think I've got about 75 pieces I put together for it, and on top of that there's another 75 historic images. So there's a lot of art in there. It's very art heavy, and it is written in the same wonderful tradition of the Oddfellow manuals of the past, the A.B. Grosh's, the Theodore Ross's, any of the big, thick, fancy gilded cover Oddfellow books from the 1800s. It's going to be very inspirational. So check it out at oddfellowsprimer.org.
Thank you very much, brother. That's exciting news. I've been telling people about that book, and I look forward to its publication. I think that is going to spur a renewed interest in Odd Fellowship.
I hope so.
All right, who's up next for the Odd Podge? Christopher, do you want to go next?
Of course I do. So I must admit, my mouth has been leaking with saliva for the entirety of this podcast.
I have that effect on people sometimes. But you can go to the doctor and get a pill for that.
Well, I was going to say, I think that you were bitten by a raccoon and all sorts of things. But. So we were speaking just before the podcast, and the wonderful seaside English town of Brighton came up, and I had to retort, one of my favorite places in the world, Mama Cherry's Soul Food Restaurant. And after I get off of this, I am going to pick up my Mama Cherry's cookbook, which I have, and I am going to make some soul in the bowl jambalaya. So my shout out is to Mama Cherry's. She's no longer there, but you should look up her cookbook on Amazon. Cheri is how you spell cherry, and it is life-changing. It is up there with the Sopranos family cookbook in one of the only 2 cookbooks that I use.
Wow, that's very high praise coming from you.
As you can tell by my finely etched physique, I do like a bit of soul food, and this is particularly amazing.
Who doesn't love a smothered pork chop? I mean, honestly, come on.
This is
where
we're going.
All right, well, I'll go next with my Odd Podge. Today, I did one of my duties as an odd fellow, although I will admit it was not exactly what I was planning on for today, because I had a gig. I actually got to go out and perform music. See, in the before times, before COVID, I used to do that frequently. So I would go out and play the accordion. People would sit in rooms and listen to it. It was amazing. Well, I did that today. One of the things that I do in between really big, important performances that I have is I like to go out and perform, especially on weekdays, at retirement centers, care facilities, places like that, where a lot of the people who are there, they do not get the opportunity to go out and experience live performances. So it's very important for me to be able to take what I do to them so that they can still have rich, full lives and get to experience the expressiveness of musical performance. So today, I went to a new place that was built recently, not too far from home, and I went in there, and I was getting set up, and all of a sudden, I heard a voice from the back of the room, Toby! Toby! A woman came up to me on her power scooter, and it turns out that it was the widow of one of my old friends from the Accordion Society. Randall Tron passed away about, I think a year and a half ago. And his widow, Marlis, is there at the retirement center at Bradley Lake. I had no idea she was there. So I actually got to sit down and visit with her and talk to her for a while at the end of the performance. Now, of course, because of COVID and restrictions, we couldn't hug and, sit around close and reminisce. We had to maintain social distance and wear masks. But it was such a wonderful thing to be able to run into someone that I've known for, better part of 20 years, and get to see her again and talk to her and relive some of our memories of my good friend and her late husband, Randall. So that's my Odd Podge for this episode. Brother Ivan, do you have something you'd like to share with us?
I think the only thing I'd like to share is I want this darn plague to be over. Go get vaccinated.
All those in favor, vote by the usual sign.
The thing I'd add to that is a lot of people that I know in Dallas, and frankly in other states, have had a hard time finding out how they were going to get vaccinated or where. I would encourage you to register everywhere you possibly can. County authorities, state authorities, local hospitals, local clinics, CVS, Walmart, any kind of hospital system. All of them have different registration facilities because distribution in this country has been shameful. The good news is there are so many different outlets now that you're bound to get into one if you actually pursue it. I sat on a CVS website for 2 hours and got an appointment in 4 days.
Nice.
I went to a Walmart website 2 days later and got an appointment on the same day that my original appointment from CVS was, an hour and a half closer. Be willing to travel, register everywhere, but please get vaccinated, because I want to come visit you and give you an awkward hug.
Yes.
And that's a promise and a threat.
Yes, I want one of those non-committal side hugs. Like, hey, brother, how you? Yeah, that's good. Yeah, thank you. That's...
No, it with me.
Where you can feel their armpit sweat on your shoulder.
Yes. One of those.
Make it awkward. It's been a long year.
Yeah. Oh, you Texans, you just want to shoot everybody, don't you? That's it.
Certainly do, with the needle.
Yes.
Here it comes.
Well, thank you so much for joining us. It has been wonderful getting to sit down and chat with you and find out all about Odd Fellowship there in Dallas. Thank you so much, Brother Ivan, for joining us. And for you listeners out there, we're going to be back with our next episode talking about the brand new lodge in Chester, Virginia. It's still so shiny and new. We just love it so much. Thank you very much, everyone. Bye-bye.